Migration is Codeigniter's version control for databases. In this video we'll have a look at how to use it. Now there's an extensive tutorial on migrations in another Tuts Plus course called Build a CMS with Codeigniter. So if you have any problems, that's another reference for you. Actually, we'll be doing three things in this video. We'll use migrations to, well, create migrations. And then we'll use the database forge class to create tables, and we'll use the terminal to run our migrations. So let's get started. Well, the first thing to bear in mind is that in the current version of Codeigniter, which is 2.1.3, migrations do not play well with all database drivers. As far as MySQL is concerned, they're not compatible with either MySQL Improved or with PDO. Which is a shame really, because it means that for migrations, you're stuck with the crappy old MySQL extension instead of the much better MySQL I or PDO. Of course, you can use a different database setup for migrations, but still. Anyway, enough whining, off we go. Well, the first thing we're going to do is create provisions to make migrations run through the terminal. So we'll first create a controller, like so, and we'll just call that migrate. Now that'll be a controller called migrate, of course, and it will not extend my controller but CI controller. And inside we'll just create a public function called index, and now make sure that we can only run this through the terminal. So what we'll do is a little if statement here, and we'll just have to reference the input class for that. And what we'll do is we'll say if this input is not a client request, so we'll set that to false, and then what we'll do is we'll just show a 404, and it might be better to cut this and paste it inside of the constructor. And now in order to be able to test it, we'll just echo hello. Make sure to save that out. Well, I'm sure we'll get loads of errors first because we don't have a regular setup, but let's try anyway. Now first of all, let's try and run this through the browser. We'll just do migrate here, and we are getting a page not found, so that's good. And now let's go to the terminal. I'm in my application root. See, I have a public HTML folder here, so let's just cd into that public HTML folder, like so. And what we'll have to do is run php index.php, and then the name of the controller, which is migrate, and then we can just do enter. Now we are indeed hitting our application, only we have an undefined index here, HTTP host. Well, of course, that's not available through client. So let's just open up index.php because that's where the problem is. We'll go into public HTML, open up index.php, and here's the culprit. Here is where we define our environment, and we're using the HTTP host server variable for that. Well, of course, client does not have access to this HTTP host variable. Let's just quickly refactor that. We'll define the environment not based on HTTP host, but based on the directory structure. So we'll just define a root variable and make that equal to the directory name of the directory we're in right now. And then we'll just do a switch statement based on that directory name. Now let's just see what directory we are in at the moment. Website and run it, and here's our current path. Okay, and then we just do if our root path equals the current root we are in right now, then we set environment to development. Let's just delete this, and now we've taken out the HTTP host, so that's not going to give us any more errors. Let's try and run it again, and here we see PHP 3 moaning about setting the date, so we'll just do that as well. Inside of index.php, we'll just set the default date time zone, and I'll just set it to my own, and you can set it to something else. Mine is Europe Amsterdam. Let's just try it one more time. And we're still getting another error about remote address this time. Now that's probably because iNorth wants to have the IP address, and it also uses a server variable for that. So we'll just also set that. We'll do an if statement and just check to see if the server variable remote address has been set. And if it's not, we'll just set it by hand, and more precisely, we'll set it to the default IP address for localhost, like so. Well, let's just try that one more time, and here we are getting hello. And with that, we are ready to set up the rest of our controller. Okay, now the first thing to do is set up migrations. And to do so, we're going into the config folder and open up the migration file. As you can see, migration is by default disabled, so we'll just set that to true and make sure it's enabled. Now, as you can see, the migrations path is set to migrations, and that means that Codeigniter expects migrations to be in a migrations folder. Now, that doesn't exist by default, so let's just go create that. Inside of our application folder, we'll create a new folder called migrations. Now, inside of our migrate controller, we'll create a couple of actions. We'll call the first action latest, and when that's run, then Codeigniter will migrate to the latest version. Now, in order to be able to use Codeigniter migrations, we need to load this library, and then we need to pass in migration. And now inside of our latest action, we can do this migration latest, and we'll just make sure to spell that right. Now, for this to work, we of course first need to create a migration, so let's do so. Inside of our migrations folder, I'll just create a new PHP file, and I'll just name that 001. That will be the migration number, and then we'll just name it create blog, because this migration will create our blog table for us. Now, the version number for this migration is quite important because Codeigniter uses it to make sure in which order to run all those migrations. Okay, well, a migration class consists of, well, a class really, and we'll name it create_blog. You see, our file name is create blog as well, and we need to have a capital C here. Now, a migration typically consists of two functions. One is called up, and we'll just copy that, and the other one is called down. Now, everything in the up method will be run when we run a migration, and everything in the down method will be run when we do a rollback. So if we create a table here, then we'll have to delete that same table here. And then there's one more thing to do, and it must make sure that create blogs extends CI migration. Okay, like I said before, we're going to create a blog table here. So what we'll do is we need this db forge library, and we need the add field method inside of that library. Now, to that add field method, we'll pass an array, and the array will contain the fields for our table. So first of all, we'll have an ID, and we'll set that using another array. And inside of that array, we'll just set the settings for our ID field. Well, it will have a type of integer, and the parameter unsigned will be set to true. And the parameter auto_increment will also be set to true. Let's just clean this up. And we do need some more fields, so let's just copy this. I think we'll have a title and we'll have a text. Now, the title will have a type of varchar, and it will have a constraint. And let's just set that to 250. And the constraint parameter handles the maximum length of this field. Now, the text will have a type of text, of course, and that's all for text, I think. Oh, and then maybe we need a publication date, so we'll just call that pub date, and that will be of the date time type, and that's all. So now that we've set up an array of fields, let's just add these to the table. But first we need to set up a primary key, so we'll do this db forge, and then we'll just do add_key. Make sure we pass in the name for that key, and set the second parameter to true, which means that this is a primary key. And now we'll just create the table with this db forge create_table. And we need to pass in the name of that table, which will be blog. Now remember that in the down method, we need to drop that table. So we'll just paste in this code, and instead of create table, we'll just do drop table. So now in the up method, we're creating a table, and in the down method, we're deleting that very same table. Okay, cool. So let's go back to the migrate controller. If we run the latest action, then Codeigniter migration will do the latest migration. Now let's just see if it works. We do php index.php migrate latest, and then we'll just have a look at the database. Well, what we do see is a migrations table, and there you have it, version 0. So probably something went wrong, and I think I know what it is. We forgot to load the db forge class. So let's go to migrate, just copy this, and make sure we do load db forge, like so. Now see if that does the trick. Let's run this again. Well, we're still not getting anything, so let's just try and echo the migration error string inside of our controller and see if that works. I'll just copy this, and then what we'll do is we'll echo the migration error underscore string. Make sure we append that with an end of line statement, just to format it, and let's run it and see what goes wrong. And there you go. The migration class migration create blog could not be found. That's probably because I did something wrong inside of the migration. Oh yes, I see. I see. I named this create blog and I should have named this migration create blog. Okay, now for the third time, let's try and run it. We're not getting anything back. Let's just refresh our database here, and we see that migrations are set at 1, and we do have a blog table here containing ID, publication date, title, and text. So let's just try and expand on our migrate controller just a little bit more. Let's just copy our public function latest, and let's make that a function called reset. And what we'll do here is we'll migrate to a version number of 0. So this basically means that all migrations will have been reset. Okay, let's just try and run that. We'll do php index.php, and then we'll just do migrate reset. Check in the database, and there you have it. Migrations are at 0 and our blog table is gone. Okay, now there's just one thing left to do for me. I would like to have an action called version, and the user should be able to pass a version number, but it should be greater than 0. So the first thing we'll do is a conditional, and we'll just say if version number equals 0, then we'll just do a die statement and say you need to pass a version greater than 0. And we'll just append an end of line statement there. And just for added security, we'll just cast the version number as an integer. So we'll do version int version. And now that we can safely assume that we have a version number that is greater than 0, we can just pass that to the version method here. Now let's see if that works. We'll just do php index.php migrate. Well, it seems like it does. I have a blog table again and migrations are set to 1. But I would like to do one final check. So let's just reset this, migrate reset, and our blog table is gone. And make sure we migrate to version 1, reload, and there's our blog table again. So this all seemed to work just fine and dandy. We now have a migration controller that is only accessible through the client and that we can use to run the latest migration, to reset all migrations, or to run a certain version of migration. Well, that's all for migrations. I'll see you in the next video.